Hello there! What is going on, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about the Onager for Star Wars Armada's Wave 8. This ship has now been out for a little while, and I figured it was a good time to break this ship down and kind of look at some maybe build ideas that I like to run on the Onager and just kind of explore it a little bit and kind of get the discussion going and see from you guys in the comment section what you like to put on the Onager. Speaking of comments, there is still time to enter to win the $25 Amazon gift card giveaway. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the Onager, since this ship is like one of my favorite ships in the game right now. It's definitely the high point of Wave 8. You know, I did do a similar breakdown for the Starhawk, which I was not a huge fan of, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Onager is just so shiny and new that it's just so different, right? I've already done a video about the ignition firing arc. I will put a link to that at the end of the video so you can check out if you want to like go into more depth on how the ignition attack works, because there have been a lot of questions about that. And I've already talked about that quite a bit, so be sure to check that video out if you have any questions on how ignition attacks work. But the Onager, that is kind of the signature of the Onager, in that it has the ignition attack. And I guess it's one of two signatures, because the other signature for the Onager is the fact that it is the first Imperial ship to bring in salvo, or, you know, Wave 8 brought in salvo, but so it's the Empire's way to get salvo into the game. So very, very cool new defensive token that allows you to counterattack with your printed rear arc, and the Onager is pretty good for that. So we have two versions of the Onager. We've got the Onager Testbed, and we have the Onager Star Destroyer. I'm going to talk about both of these versions, but I'm going to talk about the Testbed first, which is much cheaper. It's the 96-point version. Now, this is a large ship, which is particularly interesting because that means it gets more of a benefit from Ramadi, and it means it's, you know, less prone to certain tractoring devices and things like that. But it comes in a 10 hull, a single black die for anti-squadron, 3 command, 1 squadron, 3 engineering, a brace, a redirect, and that 1 salvo, which is going to be really, really nice. Admittedly, not quite as strong on the testbed, with only 2 dice in the rear arc, and at long range it would only be 1 die. But it's still, you know, still 2 dice after you get attacked is nice, since this is the type of ship that probably wants to stay at the rear of your formation. Generally, the ships that get to you are going to be fast, and a lot of those fast ships tend to be small, so even the threat of 2 dice coming back at you can be enough to maybe thwart some little snipey CR90s that want to kind of swing around and try to hit you from the side. Another thing that's really cool about this ship is that its side arcs have their yellow dot very far inwards, which means it's a lot harder for ships to get your side. They have to really be coming in at an angle. It's a lot harder for somebody to come in from straight ahead and still have a shot on your side. And that's basically representing that large hammerhead front that the ship has on in its imagery, which is pretty cool. It's a really great way to keep theme in here and also add some new mechanics. That was one thing that Wave 8 has really done, is it's moved around those yellow dots that are on the ship base quite a bit. So the Onager has a max speed of 3, which is really, really cool, especially with the testbed version having the support team option, which is actually quite phenomenal. Now, I will admit, this is not a ship that really wants to go speed 3 very often, but there are some ways that you could actually consider that. But not really it's usually a ship that you want to go pretty slow. It also has some speed 0 options. We'll talk about that a little bit. At speed 1, it's got just the 1 click, and it's just got the 1 click all the way through 2 and up to 3. And if you're going really fast, you're going to lose some clicks because you won't get a click at the end on speed 3, but you still get the 1 and 2, one of the 2 joint clicks. For its front arc, it's only got a 1 red, 2 blue, and a black. It's actually got a better long-range side arc than it does a front arc, and that's like, you usually don't see that, for a ship to have a better side arc than its front arc. But sure enough, that is the case. However, the reason for that is primarily that if you're shooting out of your front arc, you're probably shooting your ignition attack. And the ignition arc for this particular ship is awesome. With 4 red and 3 black, it makes for an extremely potent ignition attack that you can potentially shoot at extreme range. So you're looking at, you could roll doubles on all of those dice And it would really be a bad day for whoever you went up against. One thing I particularly like about this ship and its particular ignition attack is the fact that this ship, if somebody were to try to use like a Starhawk against you, if somebody were to try to like slow you down to speed 0, well, that Starhawk would have to go to speed 0. And then you could end up with rolling like 14 damage against them that they couldn't brace, which is just something that a lot of times a Starhawk facing an Onager testbed is probably not willing to do, especially if you have your flagship out in front, maybe in range of that Starhawk, and they're like, I don't know if I want to go to speed, go to speed 0 just so I can slow this other guy down. Because then if you have enough activations and you've got that Onager testbed, sitting behind, you can really, really do some nasty things. And that's just, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 potential damage showing just off your base dice. Not to mention if you had a concentrate fire or if you had Ramadi or something like that. Like there's some serious potential here. And that's just base damage. That's not including any type of critical effects that could go off. So, there's a very, very high ceiling for this Onager testbed's ignition attack. Now, you're not guaranteed to always get that, but there's actually a lot of stuff in the game now that will help you reroll both red and black dice, and some of it is available for the testbed. So that's one of the things we're going to look at when we build this ship out a little bit. For upgrades, we've got an officer slot, 2 weapons teams, in a support team, and of course the new super weapon. We'll look at some of those. We'll also look at the titles. But yes, the support team is going to be one of the interesting things here, because that's one of the things that's going to change when you go into the Star Destroyer variants. The Star Destroyer variant, the price, the first thing you're going to notice, the price is going to go up to 110 points. Some of the dice are going to change. They're definitely going to change. So you get actually a pretty good amount for the points here. Your anti-squadron battery changes now. Also, you're going to get a blue and a black die, so a much stronger squadron battery. You're going to have the same speed, same tokens. You get 3 command, 2 squadron, 3 engineering, as opposed to 1 squadron. So this one, oddly enough, actually can perform in a carrier role. While, I don't really think that's something I generally want to do with an Onager, I do think that there's now, probably more reason to keep some, a defensive screen of fighters in your rear for protection, because while your front shield can really protect you against a lot of big shots, also the fact that you're probably flying this ship slower, you're definitely going to be protected. That's kind of the way it wants to fly. It wants to fly in the back. But squadrons are definitely a threat that can move in, can definitely get those shots on your side or on your rear. And of course, if you're, somebody gets to your rear, you're not going to be very well protected with only 1 shield back there. So that's something to think about. You still have the salvo, and now your rear printed arc is actually 2 red and a blue. So you have a whole extra die in the rear, which is awfully nice. Also an extra die everywhere, because you've got an extra die in the front and on the sides. So, and you're going to change a little bit from, from basically, 2 blue and a black to, still 2 blue and a black in the front, but you have 2 red instead of 1. And then, of course, your side arc becomes a lot better. You have 2 red and a blue on the side in the test bed, but you have 3 red and a black for the Star Destroyer. So like kind of a big change of like changing a color and adding a die. So, there's definitely different combinations here. There might be some cases where the test bed side shot was actually better because you needed the accuracy and the blue was more likely to get the accuracy and stuff. But overall, the firepower on the Star Destroyer variant is way, way better. So definitely like that. You got extra dice everywhere. Well, except for your arc, your ignition attack is really where a big difference you're going to see. Is you have less of a ceiling here, but more reliability and definitely more chance for accuracies and more opportunity to trigger interesting criticals, which we're going to talk about when we look at some of the super weapons. And this is actually the version I prefer. One other important thing about the Star Destroyer variant in that this is a ship where one version of it is considered to be a Star Destroyer. The other version is not considered to be a Star Destroyer. The Onager test bed is not a Star Destroyer. However, the Onager Star Destroyer is, and thus you can equip the 7th Fleet Star Destroyer title on it. So if you were looking to run, a 7th Fleet type of build, the Star Destroyer would be a candidate for that title. I think that's worth pointing out. There are other titles to talk about, but and you have a pretty good front arc. If you wanted to run something like this, that's definitely going to be an option. So one thing you'll also notice on the Star Destroyer variant is that you lose the support team but gain the Turbolaser upgrade, which allows these two variants of this ship to perform vastly different approaches to attacking. I would suggest any build you're going to do with this ship still focus primarily on that ignition attack, because that is really the bread and butter of this ship. I think that's really the reason why you bring this ship into a build. I don't think there's much other reason if you're not going to focus on that ignition attack. However, the way you're going to approach that is going to be a little bit different. So let's talk about the ignition attack. We've got two versions. We've got the Orbital Bombardment particle cannons and the super heavy composite beam turbolasers. I'm going to talk about the Orbital Bombardment cannons first. We'll zoom in a little bit. So this is your cheaper version. It's 5 points. It's only triggers off of a red crit. Also only triggers off of an ignition attack. And it also takes up your modification. So if you're running something like this on your Onager, you're probably not going to be able to put like enhanced armament or something like that on there. Now, if you do get that ignition red crit, each other ship at distance 1 of the defender suffers 2 damage. And each squadron at distance 1 of the defenders suffers 1 damage. Now, this one is the lesser of the two, I think, although it's definitely got its uses. First off, this punishes people for clustering up. It's especially useful if you can get this off early when people are still sometimes deployed together. A lot of times, squadrons are very close to their carriers. This is going to force people to spread out. And the threat of something like this could disrupt certain formation flying, disrupt enemy plans, and also really punish your opponent for making mistakes. There are so many games where there inevitably comes a point in time where your opponent has this plan and they accidentally bump one of your ships that got in the way, and that causes their ship to not be able to move forward, which then causes the ship behind them to not to bump them, and you get this domino effect. And it's happened in a number of my games where one cleverly moved ship that moves forward and just destroys everything. And for the Empire, maybe that's a Raider. Maybe it's a Gazanti with an ECM. Maybe it's a Demolisher with engine techs or something like that. But whatever it is, some ship that moves forward at the wrong time, or your opponent didn't expect, blocks them, they bump. Now all of a sudden, all their fleet is got in a traffic jam, and they're all clustered together. And that's when I think this is an upgrade that really will shine, because you're really punishing that mistake. You're really layering it on when things are doing badly. Then all of a sudden they do extra badly. And when they're all that close together, then you can take your pick of which of the ships you want to shoot. You don't necessarily want to shoot at the ship that has contain and damage control officer, right? Maybe you want to shoot at the ship that has the most squadrons that are vulnerable to be hit by the same critical effect also. And of course, you have to kind of hope you don't fail to roll that red crit, which is one of the things that maybe Screed is a good commander if you're planning on running this particular type of thing. But there's other options too. Let's look at the super heavy composite beam turbolasers, which I think is a little more versatile, but also a little bit more restrictive. And we'll talk about why. So first off, unlike our other version, let's pull them both up here so I have them both ready to go. There we go. So one other thing I failed to mention with the bombardment particle cannons is this gives you ignition long, right? So an Onager by itself is already going to have ignition for short range, which means it can place this token at short range of itself. You can place its ignition token at short range. It can measure an ignition attack from that short range. So it still lets you shoot beyond long range, but not a whole lot farther. This one basically lets you shoot at, double of long range, because you can put that token all the way up to long range and then measure from that token all the way long range from that token to the defending ship. So really, really flexible. This one you can shoot across the entire board right away. Ton of target selection that you can have here, which is really cool. The super heavy composite beam turbolaser only extend your ignition out to medium range, which is still pretty far, but there's a big difference between medium and long range. because with the range ruler that's broken down, you have close range is a good length. Medium range is only a little bit. It's like almost half of the distance of close range, and then you got long range, which is very, very close to the same distance as close range is. So medium isn't that big a deal. But it's still nice. It's still a good, respectable amount to keep you farther back. But the real shining part of this particular crit, is its crit, is the super heavy composite beam turbolaser ignition red crit. Also, the defender suffers a damage. This occurs once for each red or blue crit icon in the pool. So they're all separate. It's not braceable. It's going to continue to happen one at a time. The only way they're going to stop this damage is if they've got a damage control officer, or if they can somehow get rid of your red crit. If you've only got one red crit, if they can somehow get rid of that. But your blue crits count here also. So I happen to like this one a lot better for the Onager Star Destroyer than for the test bed, because the test bed doesn't actually have blue dice in its ignition arc, whereas the Star Destroyer does. So this one seems to lend itself a little bit better to the Star Destroyer variant, whereas the other one, the Bombardment Particle Cannon, lends itself a little bit better for the Onager test bed. Not to say you can't mix and match them, but that's kind of where they seem to line up a little bit more. Also, they're both modifications, and the super heavy composite beam is 2 points more expensive, coming in at 7. So great. Both of them are great options. And it's worth pointing out, you don't have to add either of these. You can just totally run an Onager without it, and you'll still be able to, fire its ignition, just at only a little bit beyond long range. And the cool thing is you can still roll black dice at long range. Even when somebody's getting closer to you, you can still roll black dice at medium range, as long as they're within range of that ignition token. But running without one of those super weapons does mean you're probably a little bit more likely to take some incoming fire sooner than had you otherwise done it, because the farther out you can throw that thing, the more dice you can start throwing on ships and hopefully destroy some enemies before they get to you. So let's take a look at some things that we might do to kind of build out one of these ships. So with our Onager Star Destroyer, I'm going to build out my favorite version first, and then I'm going to give you some other options, okay? So if I was going to run a Star Destroyer, I do like to put that super heavy composite beam turbolaser on there. It's a great card. Just been talking about that at length. Now, since it's a red crit, one of the things that I will definitely want to do is put linked turbolaser towers on there. The linked turbolaser tower is going to give you a red reroll every single time. And that's important, especially when you roll that red blank, or you need an extra red crit. Maybe your opponent has an evade, or maybe you've got 2 red crits already, but your opponent has evade at extreme range, something like that. So Link Turbolaser Tower is always, really, I think, my favorite upgrade, to come out in the past 6 months, but definitely my favorite upgrade for the Onager. On top of that, we've got 2 weapons team slots, and usually people always choose gunnery team. I'm not going to put that here. I don't think gunnery team is a good option here, because after you fire with your ignition token, you're actually picking that ignition token up. So you're not going to be able to do 2 ignitions with gunnery team. It's just not going to happen. And then, the other option would be you would be able to shoot somebody else that happened to be in your front arc, but with a smaller dice pool. Usually I'd rather take a side arc shot. It's not that crucial that you run gunnery team with this particular ship. Now, the Onager does come with local fire control, but I don't like that option for this ship. I can see there being use cases for it, but I just don't think it's the best thing for this ship. I do love, however, Gunnery Chief Varnillian on this ship. She is magnificent. You get to start with a red die on her. Put it on a blank face. Hey, that's no problem. Of course, that's only if you end up being first player. Will it be a blank face? If you're second player, you can set it to whatever face you want, which is amazing, and you actually have a ton of different options. You may want that accuracy, you may want the crit, or you may want the double. There's actually nothing bad to put on her. Even a blank is not bad, because, hey, if you ever swap it in, you can re-roll it with linked turbolaser towers, which means even if you're first player, you'd have to start out with a blank die on here. The first time you roll and everything's not blank, that's when you swap them. You swap it all, and then put the blank back out into your pool, put a hit or a crit. If you got extra crits you don't need, or an extra accuracy you don't need, put it on Gunnery Chief Varnillion, then use Link Turbolasers to re-roll the blank. It's absolutely great, right? So I love that, and that works on a number of ways. First off, that works if you're doing your ignition attack. It works if you are doing a counter attack, or rather a salvo attack. So very, very cool for that. The other weapons team that I really want to run here is weapons battery techs. This one is so good. While attacking a ship, you may change one die to a face from a face with a accuracy to a face with a crit. So it lets you turn an accuracy into a crit. This is incredibly important when you've got super heavy composite beam turbolasers. So, now if you look at this from a certain point of view, this particular type of ship is now got 3 ways to get crits out there. And that may sound like, and that's a little bit too much, and I understand that. But here's why that's a really good thing, because this particular super weapon wants you to have all kinds of crits, right? It wants you to have, all red and blue crits if you can. Like, that's a really, really good way to go. So if you can get all red and blue crits, that's kind of best case scenario here. And I mean, really, the red die, it's turning a red crit into an extra damage effectively, as long as they don't cancel the crit effect. So it kind of turns a red crit into a double. The big difference here is it kind of stops the brace, because a lot of times people are going to have a brace. Honestly, using this one, I don't even care if you brace, right? Which leads me to my officer. And here's the officer I'm going to throw on this thing. Strategic Advisor is actually a really good option. There's a lot of really good officer ideas for this ship, but one of the things that I really, really like is... where are you? Where are you? He's in here somewhere. I think I went right past him. There he is. Intel Officer. Intel Officer. Probably my favorite one for this, because, hey, we're firing at long range. No matter what you've got, I don't even mind if you spend it. Intel Officer is one of my favorite officers in this game. A lot of people don't use Intel Officer, but it's just so great. It's great against ECM. Oh, you have ECM, you're going to guarantee you can use that brace? No problem. You won't be able to next turn. It's like, it's so punishing. Oh, what if they do have Damage Control Officer and they're going to hit that contain? No problem. It'll be the last time you do it. So it just gives you a ton of choice on what you do. I absolutely love this particular setup for an Onager class Star Destroyer. It just really gives you a ton of stuff. Now, and titles, right? There's all kinds of really cool titles you can use here. I don't think I even need to have a title with this kind of build. I think this build works without the need of any of the titles. But I think this is a good standalone Onager Star Destroyer build. If you just want to run that as is, that's 142 points. That's awfully expensive, but it's an incredibly strong, incredibly hard-hitting ship that does not rely on anything else to help with its dice. It's totally self-sufficient. I can almost guarantee it's going to have great dice every single time. And one of the cool things too is this, because it is rolling black dice, there's nothing that says you have to put red dice on Gunnery Chief Varnillion. Like, if you're attacking a flotilla and maybe you don't get the accuracy, or something like that, no problem. Take that black, hit crit, put that on Gunnery Chief Varnillion, store that for later, right? I mean, it's a maybe. You don't have to, but that's a really cool option, right? The choice that Gunnery Chief Varnillion gives you is wonderful, and I really, really like that. You could even be salvoing somebody back, and you're like, oh, let me swap dice. You can't add dice, but you can do other dice modification, like swapping them. It's just so cool. Okay, so I want to also do an Onager testbed option for you guys. The testbed is really cool. I'm going to close this one out there. There we go. Let's put the testbed in here. Before I do the full build with the testbed, I want to also talk about the titles. I also want to talk about certain commanders that I think are going to work well. So since I don't have the 7th Fleet Star Destroyer available because the testbed is not an actual Star Destroyer, we're going to look at the different titles for this. So the Cataclysm is something that's going to let you shoot right away. The Cataclysm is the only way you can do an ignition attack on the first round, because you place that ignition token at the end of your activation. So that means you couldn't fire on the first round. You're just not going to be able to have it out there. You're not going to have the range of the ignition token. Okay, no problem. So if you have some kind of option like Hondo Anaka or something like that, that can give you a token at the same time as this is triggering, so you can just activate Hondo first, you can have a token at the start of the ship phase. Now you can spend that, place it right away, and then of course you can go. We'll talk about a build that uses this here in just a moment. And so this is, it gives you some error correction. I think it's most powerful to get that first turn shot, but it also allows you a little flexibility in case people are, consistently outmaneuvering you. If you get the tokens again later on in the game, it does give you a little more flexibility on where you want to shoot. It's fun, but not necessarily mandatory. But I think it's one that will see more play as people get used to outmaneuvering the Onager and kind of shake up things a little bit. So I think the Cataclysm starts out kind of weak because it's only, it seems like on the surface it's only good for that first turn play. I think as the game goes on, I think we'll see more and more Cataclysm play, as months go by and people start being able to predict the Onager a little bit better. It would kind of change up some of that predictability. The Rake Hell, this is one that wants you to be at speed 0. This is if you're really trying to keep it very, very far back. This is good for certain objectives where you have to defend a position. Rake Hell is going to be great for that. If you just want to stay at speed 0, you don't want to, maybe you want to contest a station, or maybe you want to keep that front arc, where you've got some lambdas moving like fire lanes tokens, and you're just pulling them back and just staying right there. And I'm going to sit on top of them at speed 0, and then you can still keep turning. I don't like the Rake Hell because I'm desperately afraid of going speed 0. However, speed 0 is now a thing, and while I'm not crazy about it, it's neat. It's neat to let you turn at speed 0, but I'm reluctant to actually run that one. And Sunder is really interesting, and I like this one, but boy is it expensive at 10 points, so I have a hard time fitting this into a lot of builds and really justifying it, because to make it really work, sometimes just the option of it will scare the heck out of some people, and I think that's probably one of the good things about it. But if you get the blue or black crit, you can discard this card to choose and discard another upgrade from the defender. And it has to be offensive retrofit, defensive retrofit, or ordnance, ion, or turbolaser. So that's rough. Of course, it doesn't get rid of an officer. It won't get rid of a title. It doesn't have quite the power of Darth Vader. And it's also just a one-shot, so it's not something you can do again. Of course, I get it. You don't want, card stripping abilities to be able to be used multiple times, but boy, is this one expensive. It can be used on a blue or a black crit, so I figure it can go on any version and still be all right. But generally, I feel like this is maybe one of those reasons that you'd probably want to take potentially something like Fire Control Team, if you wanted to both be able to do that crit. Like, I feel like Fire Control Team would be a good option with Sunder. If you wanted to use one of the super weapon crits and Sunder, you could also use the super weapon crits and the default crit, so Fire Control Team still works that way. But if you wanted to run Sunder and Fire Control Team and that, you'd have 3 crits, then you could just choose the best 2. So that would be kind of an interesting way to run something like Sunder. That's one of those options, and it's cool to have something like Sunder because especially since you never know what you're gonna face, you could end up facing like, oh, this Avenger or this ship, they got XI7s, and that's just gonna shut me down, or oh, this this Demolisher's got. You can get the defensive retrofit. It'd be really good to get ECM off of ships, and since you can do that at extreme range. This one doesn't have this critical effect doesn't have to be off of your ignition, so that's kind of cool too. But overall, it's got some good titles. I don't think it's got mandatory titles. Like, I can definitely run this without a title and not feel like I'm not getting the capability out of the ship. I feel like it's the super weapons that give you some of the best capability out of the ship, and not necessarily the titles. So if I'm running an Onager testbed, who are some of the upgrades that I would take, right? I already talked about Varnillion. I think she's awesome. I already talked about weapons battery techs. I definitely like those as well. I do want to talk about Ordnance Experts, though, because Ordnance Experts is great. That's when you're attacking, reroll black dice. That's also this is gonna work on your squadron attacks. It's gonna work on your front arc attacks. Now, if you're using the test bed, your side arc doesn't have the black dice like it does on the Star Destroyer. So, but you're getting so much more in your ignition arc that I feel like it's worth it. Again, you're going to want to make that ignition arc work as much as possible. So in this one, maybe I would run the Orbital Bombardment Particle Cannon. This one doesn't, like the other one wants blue crits also. This one still wants red, but I have actually more red dice. I've got 4 red and 3 black, so I actually have a better chance of triggering the bombardment cannons here. It means I can also roll black dice from much farther away, which is kind of cool. I kind of like that. You know, I could see putting maybe veteran gunners here. I kind of like that. If you really needed it, I could see maybe sensor team. But I like fire control team on this one. Let's go ahead and build out a Sunder. Right, we've got a couple of options here. We got that bombardment cannon. We've got Sunder, and you know, there's all kinds of choice here, because if we're firing at somebody who's all by themselves, then our choices would be clear. We'd go with Sunder potentially. We don't even have to, and then the default crit. If we're firing and they're all grouped together, but they don't have anything good, we go with Orbital Bombardment Cannon and the default crit. You know, if we're not going to get through their shields no matter what, then maybe we go with the Bombardment Cannon and Sunder. You know, we definitely have some great options here. So that much is kind of cool. All right, I'm going to give you guys some janky stuff too. So here's something kind of cool. Since this ship has a support team, you know, it's pretty cool. Now, there's a couple of things we could do on here. If we wanted it to be a little bit more survivable, we could put auxiliary shield team on there. Maybe, you know, bump up those sides a little bit. But no, let's talk about engine techs. Let's talk about running this ship sideways. Let's talk about that, because there's some crazy stuff we could do. There is some crazy stuff. You know, you could, you could potentially. Let's talk about Ozzel. Ozzel's another one that I really like here, because Ozzel is got 2 uses, I think, but I'm gonna talk about running him with like Jerjerrod. Okay, you can basically strafe, and you know, if you want to take a little bit of damage for doing it, but imagine you're facing somebody who's like coming straight at you, and you just want to, you know, they're coming at you this way. You want to just be able to go like this. You know, you can take that first click. Let's say you're speed 3. You know, you got a nav or whatever. Speed 3, you're going to trigger Jerjerrod. You're going to get 2 clicks this way. All right. Then you can go 1, or you can just go 2 clicks this way and then go another one this way and take an extra click on that way, and then go the engine techs and just turn around. Like there's just so many, you know, ways you can kind of totally flip your opponent upside down with like, hey, how did you get there? You're supposed to stay in one spot with the Onager. You know, it's hard for me to show you in this, you know, but I'm gonna try and do that in a battle report one of these days. I'm gonna try and run a side strafing Onager. I just feel like that would be a lot of fun to pull off, and I would love it. And of course, if you have in your fleet, let's say you also have maybe a Side Moon, and oh man, that would be pretty cool if you're running a Side Moon with the new Take Evasive Action. You know, you can do something like that. Maybe you run Take Evasive Action to have get the extra. Increase the last yaw value of your current speed. Well, hey, last yaw value of your current speed has got no clicks. So now if you do your nav and you take that click there, you know, Jerjerrod is giving you 2 at the 1. You're going to end up having 2 at the 2 with your nav. You can really do some crazy stuff. And you've got engine techs on top of that, which is, that's something nasty. It's something really nasty. It's very fun. So you can do some very surprising stuff with Jerjerrod and Ozzel and all that. There's another Ozzel use for this ship I want to talk about also. So let's back up a little bit. Let's put on let's say we had a Gazanti in our fleet, and we're gonna put where's Hondo? We'll put Hondo on there so we can try to get that token right away. And I want to talk a little bit about Cataclysm. So the idea here is we've got probably a long range. If we wanted to do a heavy bid for first player, they're all set up. Okay, they're set up good. this is the basics of it. We can put whatever gunner upgrades we want, whether it's we can do this for either version, but I think it works a little better with the most red dice we can get, because we may end up shooting someone who has an evade, and then they're going to cancel a lot of stuff. So, but the point is, if you can run Hondo and you can get the Cataclysm to trigger, you can place that ignition before you go. Before you do that, Ozzel is at the very start of the first round. This is again before the start of the ship phase. Ozzel is going to let you take a speed 1 maneuver. So now you're going to be even closer to your opponents. And on top of that, they may not have deployed in the way that you thought they were going to deploy. So you might have deployed going straight, and then they was like, we'll deploy over this way. And then that speed 1 maneuver with Ozzel lets you turn, face them, right? And this is just fun shenanigans, right? To really, and on top of that, you'll be a little bit closer too, so you'll have a slightly better selection of ships to shoot at. So I like the idea of Ozzel and Cataclysm working together. That's another kind of a fun thing to do with the Onager. So, worked out a couple of build ideas. I think it's a real fun ship. I think it's, some people were talking about, running multiple Onagers at some point. I don't think that's really the best way to go forward. You can fit 3 of them in a build. I'm just not super crazy about that idea. Now, for I think 1 is probably all you're likely to need. So let's talk about the commanders a little bit. So Constantine's terrible. I wish there was a way to make him a little bit better. I wish he's somebody I think I just want completely redesigned. Messing with other people's speeds is frustrating, and I just don't like Constantine that much. And it's a shame. Also, he's also too hard to use. There's so many times he just won't do anything at all. So and he's overcosted for being somebody that probably won't work a lot of the time. Mahdi is great. Mahdi works really good on this ship because it's a large ship. Ozzel, not somebody I'd want to use here. I'd rather use Ozzel as an officer. Piet, not really seeing that being particularly useful. Screed, definitely useful. Definitely useful for this one, considering you specifically want red crits for things. He can guarantee that red crit. So Screed is an absolutely good option for the Onager. Even though he costs you a die, it's good to be able to lock it in. And then he gives you a lot of flexibility with those other upgrades, so you don't necessarily have to run things like linked Turbolaser towers and Varnillion and things like that. Sloane is all right. I don't know if she's the best for an Onager specific build, but I mean, if you can get it to where your squadrons are attacking first and you hold your Onager back, and we spent all your defense tokens, now comes the big shot from downtown. That could be cool. Vader, always cool. I absolutely love Vader, and I think Vader will work really well with the if you wanted to run multiple Onagers too, because you're firing from so far away, give you lots of extra rerolls, and you don't need those defense tokens for anything. Your opponent's way out of range. Love it. Palpatine may actually be a really cool new option. Palpatine is not somebody I've really enjoyed. When I have tried to run Palpatine in the past, I have not had a good time. But I think now Palpatine having the option to be able to shoot turn 1 and definitely be able to shoot turn 2, you're having more rounds of shooting, which means Palpatine's ability is going to matter more, and especially when evades are the big threat to that early round shot at extreme range. If you choose evade first turn, is your opponent really going to want to lose evades right away? I think that's a really cool option. So that is a fun one, and especially if you stack it with Intel Officer also. I'm because then you can be Palpatine evades or turn 1. All right, so we stop all the evades, or potentially, and then Intel Officer, and then stop the brace. And then turn 2, we Palpatine brace, and then Intel Officer the evades. So you can kind of double down on it, which is nasty. Then Ramadi, who comes with it. He's great. It's very, very easy when a shot is that far away for it to be obstructed. So I think Ramadi is also one of those A+ people for the Onager. Tag, not really a big fan of it. I mean, I suppose you could probably tag Nita TRC on the Onager Star Destroyer, and that might be an option, but I don't see you spending it twice to lose it. You know, because you can't do two of those shots. So I don't see tag being particularly helpful, but in some cases it could be nice. Thrawn's universally good, and I think he'd be fine in an Onager fleet. I think Tarkin's getting better. I think there's more stuff using tokens, but Tarkin's still way too expensive for what he does. And Jar Jar, who is really cool. Jar Jar's good in so many Imperial fleets, and I think he's got some uses, but only if you're trying to do the janky, weirdy stuff for the Onager. But generally, no. I think the best commanders as a whole right now for the Onager specifically are going to be Screed, Vader, and Ramadi. I think those are the main three. While Mahdi is great, you shouldn't want your Onager taking a whole lot of fire. So like you shouldn't have to rely on Ramadi, right? Like that's one of those things. So those are my top three commander picks for this ship. But ultimately, I like both versions. I think I prefer the Star Destroyer version though, because of the blue crit option. I've had some success there, but I think both versions are really cool. And maybe I'll run two of them side by side and see how well that does. That would be kind of fun too. Well, all right, guys, that is about all I've got to say for the Onager. It's a really, really fun ship. Be sure to check out my Ignition Attack video. I will link up here. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Also, big thanks to my patrons. You guys are amazing and definitely help make this all possible. So thank you for your continued support. I couldn't do this without you. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.